more rare.
I wish they should plan my honeymoons. That sounds great.
They should take the mom and the dad.
So here's the chapter we're looking at today. Here you go, Beth. Anybody else need chapter 9?
Oh, that's perfect.
Were you at Rabbi Label Wolf's lecture? Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
That's how I found out about that.
Good. So I thought we'd take the first half of the class today and do a quick review of chapters 1 to 8, because I know 2 new people here and possibly some people watching on the video. Hello if you are. So after Label's lecture, I said we'd just do a review. And I think not bad for us as well to kind of encapsulate everything we've learned so far. So this is called the Tanya. In terms of Kabbalah and the expression of Kabbalah through what's called Hasidus, some people refer to this as the written Torah of Hasidus. Right? So it's actually treated almost like a semi-sacred book. It's studied, in its exact form. The words and letters said to have certain meanings. So it's beyond even just a Kabbalistic or Hasidic text. It's considered almost the written Torah of that tradition.
What's the definition of that Tanya?
Tanya means where you were taught. It's just the first word. Tanya means it was taught. Like from when you learn Talmud, it says, Tanya be, and from some source, just means it was taught in whatever chapter or from whatever sage. So Tanya is not the name that would let you understand what the book is about so much. It's just the first word of the book, that's all.
I thought it might be the name of a pretty Russian girl.
I'm sure of many. Yeah. And that leads into the subject of the book. It's called the Book of the Beinoni, the Book of the Intermediates. And that's a more descriptive term. It's a book on how to be this type of person called a Beinoni, an intermediate. And the author, the Alter Rebbe, was one of the students of the Maggid Mizrich, who was the main disciple of the Baal Shem Tov. So if you're looking at Kabbalah and the history of Kabbalah, the Baal Shem Tov was the first mystical figure that really shared Kabbalah and mysticism with the wider world, and in a way that people that aren't learning 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day can understand. So he comes out of that tradition, but he really put it out in a way that was very clear, very delineated, and that even our intellect could understand something above the intellect, something that had to do with mysticism. And also, yeah?
Why did he think that we should know about it when he and his predecessors didn't think so?
It has to do with changing in history, right? We noticed that many changes happened at that same point, the late 1800s, including the Industrial Revolution, changes in science, changes in the way we thought in terms of logic, etc., and breaking away from traditions. The world became more chaotic. And so the understanding is that the traditions that were just mystical in that point now were needed for people like you and me to function. If you look at our lives, it's very different from how my ancestors 300 or 400 years ago lived. Right? I meet so many more people in 1 hour potentially than they met in a whole lifetime. Right, where their environment would have stayed stable the whole time. I've moved from city to city, and the landscape of each city changes every 10 years. And so much information flooding in and out. So the feeling was history has changed, and so what was secret before is now needed for normal Jewish people to do what their souls were brought here to do. Also, he wrote it because so many followers were coming for personal audiences with him, with the same spiritual problems and spiritual questions. And he said, I'm going to put all in this book, everything that I tell all my followers, because I can't possibly see everyone anymore. And I'm writing this book such that when you learn it, it is actually a private audience with me. And it's hard to explain how that works if you don't understand that on the highest level, for a Jewish mystic, when you're looking at their physical body, you're not looking at who they are. Right? If I look at the face or the body of a Jewish mystic man or woman, that's not their identity. right? Any more than looking at a snapshot, a selfie of me is now you're looking at me. You're looking at a representation of me. What they really are is their connection with what we call the Ein Sof, which means infinite. That's the term in Kabbalah used for God. They are their connection with the Ein Sof. They are their spiritual teachings. That's their identity. And they are the spiritually productive things they do, right? We can call them learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, but this is their spiritual life. And so a Jewish mystic would say, yeah, you can come sit with me, but you're not talking to me. When you learn this book, you're actually meeting me. And he in particular wrote this book with in mind that as we learn it, where it's as if we're having a private audience with the Alter Rebbe. And it's maybe good to learn it with that in mind, that it's not like other information where it's just about memorizing what's in the book and becoming familiar. It really is an encounter with the essence of this mystical teacher and that whole tradition. And as an aside, that's why you'll see many, many brilliant geniuses learning stuff that they've learned for the 100th time or the 101st time over and over again, even though they know it cold. They could tell you exactly every letter, every word, every commentary on it, and yet they sit and learn it again with love, because that's the sense. When we're learning a Jewish text, it's more like, as I said earlier, it's more like going on a date with my wife. You know, after so many years or decades, you may know exactly how the conversation's going to go. You may know exactly what food will be ordered. You may know exactly, the arc of the evening. And someone might look and say, well, why are you doing that? You know exactly what's going to happen. But of course, we know it's, of course, I love it. I love everything about it. This is a relationship. So I'm going to sit and I'm going to have exactly the same dinner and the same conversations we've had many times, variations, because we're in a relationship. We love each other and we're coming close through that encounter. And for Jewish mysticism, learning any text, but certainly Torah and as well the mystical text, it is actually an encounter. It's a holistic style of learning that is maybe a little foreign to us in North America. Right, so how it works is, this is actually a user's guide for how we can more masterfully, flow through our souls. So like any user's guide, most of it is instructions for what to do. But if you have a new dishwasher or something, or a new computer, it comes with a user's manual. The first section won't be what to do with it. The first section will be probably, this is all the buttons, this is what they do, these are all the functions, information, right? Or if you ordered a cookbook and you opened up your favorite recipe and wanted to see how to do it, there were instructions, but beforehand there's something else. What do they have first? Ingredients, right? So I have an information section. I need 3 eggs, right? And then what to do with them. So we have just finished chapters 1 through 8, which we'll overview now. That's the information section of the Tanya, which really tells us the ingredients of our soul, the different functions of our soul, and in fact, the whole structure of our soul. And as we've seen, that structure is not, as some project, a single point inside, or sort of a general, when we talked about it, people talked about a sense of a general sphere of light or something like that. That's simple. The Jewish soul is a very complex being with the same complexity as our physical anatomy. And that's because everything in the physical reflects the spiritual and flows out of it. So the reason our anatomy is so complex is because our soul is so complex. So let's go through a little bit of that now, and I apologize if it's quick. And all this is actually on YouTube. If you want to get this text, it's volume 1 of Lessons in Tanya. It's $20 online, and then you can just follow along. I know sometimes the English is hard to hear on the video. So chapter 1, the Alter Rebbe starts and says, before a soul is born into a body, it's administered an oath, and that oath is, anybody? What's the oath? Be a
good Jew.
Right, which we call a tzaddik, right? The oath is, be righteous, be a tzaddik, and don't be wicked. But even if you really are doing great and the whole world says, oh, you're a tzaddik, think of yourself as a wicked person. So that's the oath, and this is all from the Talmud. This is drawn from sources, so this is from the Talmud. We're given an oath, each of us before we came here, tried to be a tzaddik and not wicked. But no matter what anyone says about you, think of yourself as a wicked person. And then if you listen to those first few lectures, he goes through and picks apart and raises many problems and questions with that. Aren't I going to be depressed if I think of myself as a wicked person? Elsewhere it says, don't think of yourself as a wicked person, so which one are we supposed to follow? And without answering any questions, he creates a lot of tension in the questions that he opens. Then he talks about 5 types of people, 3 main categories and 5 complete types. And this is going to help us in terms of understanding where we are in terms of our soul flowing through our body. And the 5 types are, there's a completely righteous person, we call it a complete tzaddik. Pretty much righteous person, called an incomplete tzaddik. There's an incomplete rasha, which we had a whole conversation. Rasha, evil is not the right definition of it, right? Evil, rasha just means any amount of self-centeredness left, any ego drive. And then there's a complete rasha, right? Who's completely self-centered, right? Like this person is, the way a baby is self-centered, they're like that their whole life, right? A baby will get hungry at 3 in the morning and just not think nothing of crying and waking everyone up. It's not a problem, right? They're completely self-centered. It's natural for a baby. Imagine an adult that lives their whole life like that. Just that's the only consideration. It's all about me. It may look more sophisticated, but still that drive is the only drive acting. And then finally, he brings an important key, and that is, he says, in fact, we don't have one soul we're dealing with as a person. We actually have 2 souls. 2 souls. And introduces the first soul as being a soul from this direction soul, the soul that is self-centered, right? The soul that, as a baby, I think about me, I want to be fed, I want to be warm, I want to have comfort, I want to have relationships, and it's all in this direction, right? We call that soul the animal soul, and he generally introduces it at the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2, he now introduces and starts to describe the second soul, which in fact is second because it comes in second in our life, right? That's what a bar mitzvah is. At a bar mitzvah,
The 5th category.
oh, 5th category, yes, is a Bainani. Thank you. So sorry, there's a complete rasha, incomplete rasha, complete tzaddik, incomplete tzaddik, and then there's the Bainani, the title of the book, which is the intermediate person, which is not a rasha and not a tzaddik, but he leaves it undefined for now. In fact, we're now 4 chapters away from defining it in chapter 12. So we don't quite know what a Bainani is, but it's neither one nor the other, and that's the title of the book. It's that we're actually learning how to emulate. Then in chapter 2, he introduces what's called the godly soul. That's this direction. Right? The soul that flows towards other people, considers other people, and in a much more macro sense, the soul that has a direct connection with the Ein Sof. Right? A direct connection with the Ein Sof. In fact, it is nothing more than a part of the Ein Sof itself. Right? So I have one soul, one full being that is looking out for number 1. Hi! I like your hat. And then I have another soul, a second soul, which is an actual part of the Ein Sof. And that soul, he describes it in a number of ways. He says, that it was blown into humanity. Because if we remember the story of Adam and Eve, and Adam was formed out of earth, and then God blew the soul into Adam. And that was different than everything else that was created in Genesis. How was the rest of the world created? Through what?
Words.
Speech, words. Right? So I can talk and talk and talk, as people in this room will attest, for an hour with no problem. Very happy to do so. But if I were to try and blow up balloons for an hour, I'd get very tired. I have to take breaks. Blowing draws from deeper within myself than speaking. Blowing is a more inner gift. It's a more inner movement than speaking. So the rest of the world was created through speech, an external aspect of the Ein Sof. Then the Ein Sof reached somehow deeper within itself to its inner light to create humanity. So the soul is somehow from deeper within inside the Ein Sof than the rest of creation. And he also describes it as, and this is from the Torah, it arose in God's thought to create Jewish souls, as it were. And again, where speech is communicating to those around me, it's external. Thought is more internal. So again, saying something about the Jewish soul was an inner desire, delight, movement of the Ein Sof, of this infinite being that we're calling God. And he points out what Maimonides says, that don't think because God thought of it that somehow it's like our thought. And this is a key to Jewish mysticism, is being able to strip away the physical parameters or submodalities of a conversation and try and understand it in a mystical or conceptual way. Right? So when someone says it arose in God's thought, I think, oh, like my thought. I think of something. Yesterday I didn't think about it. Now it's new. I thought about it. It's added to myself. I might put in a book and put it out in the world. Now it's a book that exists on its own. There's what I thought of. There's the way that I think. And then there's the person who's thinking. They're three separate components. And so when we say a Jewish soul arose in God's thought, we may think it also has three components. The soul is one thing. The way God thinks is another, and then there's Ein Sof, God. But Maimonides says, no, you can't understand it, but God is the knowledge, the knower, and the known all at once, without any division. One phenomenon. And no human can understand that, but we should at least know that when we say something arose in God's thought, it's not like our thought, where I can say there's me, there's how I think, and there's what I thought about, and I can divide them. The take-home is, because the Jewish souls arose in God's thought, they never became separate. It's not like a thought that I have that I can write on a blackboard and now it's outside of me. That soul is always still, as it were, like a thought that I have before it even occurred to me, just united with me. That's the state of Jewish souls. Those are a couple just descriptions of the Nefesh Elokit. For our purposes, that's the part of my psychology that considers other people around me, that thinks of others first, that is generous in an other-centered sense, and also the part that has that relationship with the Ein Sof, that in fact we all have that sense of yearning of wanting to leap up and go back to our source, and that's the soul that is like a candle flickering up, wanting to lose itself again in the infinite. And that's what would happen if that soul were back in its source. It would be almost nullified. There'd be no soul. It'd be like a candle within the ball of the sun. A soul within Ein Sof doesn't really have an existence. And finally,
Can I add something real quick?
yeah,
I heard an interesting thought yesterday. Somebody mentioned that this godly soul really doesn't come into its own until a bar bat mitzvah. That, you know, the animal soul has all this 12 years head start, and the godly soul is playing catch up.
exactly. That's why it's called the second soul, yeah, is because we may notice children, as innocent and lovely and amazing and loving as they are, they lack a certain mature capacity to say, oh, you know, maybe I'm going to consider that my mom or my dad is in a bad mood today. Like, that's something that comes a little bit later in its truest form, right? And when a person hits bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, that's when the divine soul stops being sort of a encompassing soul, and it moves into affecting my consciousness. And that's why a person is now responsible for their actions. So until 12 or 13, it's basically the animal soul learning the habits of a good person. But I give somebody $5 for a sandwich because I can't stand to see them hungry, right? And there's a part of me that still, even though I'm doing something good, there's a part of me that did it because it bothered me to see someone so hungry. So even though I'm doing something that's really productive, that's still kind of an animal soul drive in there. It was something about me that was disturbed, and now I've relieved it by giving them the $5. Whereas the divine soul will just say, oh, someone's hungry, I have $5, that's what I should do. No sense of, do I feel better now or not? It's a very subtle difference, but that's what we call maturity in Judaism. Then in chapter 3, we start to look at the anatomy of the divine soul. And here, if someone's interested, I do have a class we're teaching that's open to the whole community. And here we're going to go through chapter 3 over 5 weeks. So if someone, we can pass these around, if someone hasn't had a chance to actually learn the tree of life in the Sfirot, we're going to take 5 classes in the evening to go through chapter 3 in more detail, and also learn from some of my teachers' techniques how one can use that information to quickly change patterns in one's life. A little less deliberate than the Tanya, a little more quick, and you can just get it up on its feet the next day. But chapter 3 looks at what the divine soul is, right? Who it is. And it describes 10 emanations, which if we've seen the tree of life, this is what they are. 10 emanations that flow from the Ein Sof through all of the created worlds, which includes this physical world and then 4 spiritual worlds above that, which are just more and more subtle versions of this world and therefore more powerful versions. And the 10 Sfirot, they flow through all those worlds as emanations from the Ein Sof, and also as the sort of matrix by which each of the worlds is being created, and also as attributes within each of our personalities. So we can understand them from each of those 3 levels. They function on every level. And what we need to know is there's one main division. 3 of them, the first 3 are intellectual, Chokhmah, Bin, and Da'at, and to kind of get more about how we characterize them, this class will cover that. And the intellectual ones should be the parents for the next 7, which are emotional and behavioral. So Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchut. That's my emotions and then how I actually interact with people in terms of a psyche. And the Alter Rebbe describes that the intellectual midot, attributes, are the parents of the emotional attributes in the divine soul. So what does that mean? That means that I think that something is a good idea. I think that feeding people that are hungry is the right thing to do. And I consider it, and I develop that, and I connect to that through my intellect. And then, lo and behold, I will have appropriate feelings about that. My emotional attributes will flow and say, okay, there's hungry people. It's a good thing to do to go help. Let me actually go and do that, right? And in every dimension, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a cause, whether it's a time, use of my life, whatever it is, everything will flow. Intellect guides emotion. And he takes a quick look at the actual Sfirot and their nature and what they are. And that is who the soul is. Then in chapter 4, we move to the more external expression of the soul. Not what the soul is, but what the soul does. What the soul does, the behavior of the soul. And this is sometimes a big shift for North Americans, because I might think my identity is, like if someone says, who are you? Say, well, I'm everything I've said, everything I've done, everything I've thought, kind of put it all together into a big file, a big story, and that's me, right? That's who I am. I think of that as me. Kabbalah says, that's not you, that's your clothing, right? We call those the garments of the soul. So the external expressions of the soul are thought, speech, and action. And thought is different from intellect. Intellect, Chokhmah, Bin, Da'at, are the various capacities to be able to think. Right? I have intellect, therefore I can have inspiration. Right? I have intellect, therefore I can deduce, I can categorize, I can order, I can pull out detail. I have intellect, therefore I can connect or disconnect from ideas. But it doesn't mean I'm doing it. Thinking is an activity, right? If I ask you to, count to 1,000 in your mind, 1, 2, 3, right? I'm doing something. I can start that and stop that. Active thought. I know how to count to 1,000. I knew yesterday. I knew last year, but I wasn't doing it until I actually said, okay, count to 1,000 in my mind. Right? So there's many, many things we know that we don't actively think about. And we can always choose, according to Kabbalah, what it is we're actively thinking about. So that's thought, as opposed to intellect. And thought, along with speech and along with action, is simply a garment of the soul. And like physical garments can be taken off or put on, can be changed. Like physical garments, they allow us to present ourselves to other people. I wouldn't have walked in here had I not been wearing garments, right? I'd be kind of hidden away. And then in the public, I wear garments. It allows me to present myself. But strangely, it also hides me, right? We're really only looking at some hands and some heads in this room, right? We're not looking at the people. Most of us is hidden. Same thing with the garments. When I look at someone and look at their words and their actions and kind of get a sense of their thinking, that's hiding their true essence, their soul. Over a lifetime of looking at the garments, you can get more and more of a sense of someone's soul. That's what relationship is. But in fact, if I'm just looking at the thought, speech, and action of a person, that's hiding who the soul is. That's just what the soul's doing.
Why is it more difficult for us than, say, the Europeans to understand that?
I'd include the Europeans, and Americans. I mean Western culture. I think Eastern culture tends to have a more transcendent view of the world, and so they're a little more aware that conscious thought is different than intellect. And certainly the Middle Eastern traditions have a very detailed approach to that, and generally don't experience conscious thought as being my identity at all. But in North America, or in the West, I think we consider conscious thought to be one of the central points of our identity. It's just cultural bias. Yeah. And finally, one key piece about the garments, even though they seem like they're superficial, this is the end of chapter 3, because they come from a much higher source, the garments of the divine soul elevate the divine soul above its own source. And that has to do, again, with when you're talking about the Ein Sof, you can't pull pieces out and say, I got a piece of it, right? It's always Ein Sof is Ein Sof. You can't split up godly infinity, right? So if I am putting a dollar in a tzedakah box, and I think I'm looking at some physical reality, a paper dollar and a metal box, and it's going to some actual physical charity, it's down here in the physical world, but to the Ein Sof, God wants charity, right? So we all like that, we agree with that, we identify with that. God wants tzedakah. But unlike me, when I want something, I could say, I want a house, and that house is separate. When God wants tzedakah, God's will, Ratzon, is a very lofty aspect of the Sfirot and is never divided from the Ein Sof at all. So even though I'm looking at a physical dollar in a physical box, when I do that, that's actually the infinite right there, and it's pulling my soul up with it. And because it's completely united with the Ein Sof still, and my soul is in some ways still has identity, my soul now is being pulled upwards, even though it's an external part of the soul. It's a very counterintuitive one to get at. But the take home is, the garments of the divine soul lift us upwards, above our source, and the opposite is also true. The garments of the animal soul, if I get angry and start yelling at somebody in traffic, or if I decide, I don't want to share my cake that I made, I'm going to eat it all myself, that is now taking my soul and bringing it back down even further into physical reality than it would normally be. Any questions on that so far? It's a tremendous amount. We spent months on just that.
So you're saying to do something charitable,
Yeah,
it's like a mitzvah,
yeah.
and God recognizes that? Is that what you're saying?
God recognizes it, but it's not something separate from God, right? The Ein Sof recognizes things by recognizing itself.
So he expects that.
I wouldn't say he, but yeah. Also expects, wants, but the key is when I recognize something, I recognize it by it being something, a separate component, right? I recognize this as a book and it's outside of me. The Ein Sof knows creation by knowing itself, right? And especially when it's something the Ein Sof wants, now it's a very energized aspect to the Ein Sof. I look at it, I think it's separate. It's like it's me and it's it, and God's recognizing, as you say, and then God wants me to do it, and maybe I get a reward, and hooray. But from the perspective of Ein Sof, it doesn't care that it's physical reality. Ein Sof transcends reality, non-reality, being, non-being. All I'm doing is putting on the garment of what we call will of Ein Sof, Ratzon of Ein Sof. And so that's far, far above the source of my soul, and now I'm elevating my soul, even though my physical body thinks I'm just putting a dollar in a pushka, who cares, right? So it's not so much the recognizing or wanting as it was still united. I'm actually dealing with Ein Sof when I do that. That's the mystical way of looking at a mitzvah.
Like the connection?
Yes, the connection, yes. Yeah.
So my soul is a kind of a scorekeeper. When I do things right, gives me an upcheck. When I don't do it properly, down.
Yes, and you bring up a point that we could use this as like, how many points did I get? And I could turn it again into something where I'm thinking of number one again, right? So it's subtle. Even as we move upwards in these practices, we need to be careful that I don't say, as you're implying, well, what were my points today? What did I get out of this?
So how do I know?
Yeah, the animal soul
Right.
also has a spiritual component, and it can happy to show up and teach a Tanya class at Temple Israel and say, here I am, and now people think I'm so smart. Now I've helped these people. Look how great I am. Now I'm enjoying spiritual income as opposed to physical income, right? So we need to be careful that at every level the animal soul is there, happy to do its dance, and it's our job to maintain. Yes, there is something keeping track, and we are improving the world, but we should be doing it for the sake of the world, and for the sake of the Ein Sof, and for the sake of the people in our lives, not for the sake of, okay, now my soul has a big treasure chest in heaven. I assume that's your point.
Is there any way of my getting to my soul to find out whether I'm plus or minus?
Unless you're a very special person, I think most of us don't know where it's at.
But a special person could do that?
I'm told there are. I'm told that, we've heard about people that could look at someone and say, your soul came to do this, or, this is happening in heaven, or this blessing is coming to you, but you just have to do this. We have stories about that. I don't personally know anyone who's like that.
Well, I ain't one, so don't worry.
There you go. But the Jewish practice is to live as if everything depends on our next action, including the fate of my soul, including the fate of the whole world. And that's all just balanced right in between, and that one more good decision will make the difference for everything. And if you live that way at every moment, that's probably better than wondering, okay, am I ahead of the game? Am I behind the game? Right? Because we don't know.
It's not like the stock market.
No, I probably missed part of the update, but that chapter we learned about the Rasha and the Beinoni and the Tzaddik.
Yeah.
We have to live every day thinking we're a Rasha, but
Yes.
we're a Beinoni, and we're never going to be a Tzaddik.
Yeah.
There are only so many Tzaddiks. And
Very good. So another point was we started the whole book saying consider yourself like a Rasha, and so that's another answer to your question, which is it doesn't matter if I'm ahead. I took an oath to think of myself as behind, so I'm going to keep working. Right? My kids' soccer coach, they were ahead a tremendous amount. They were a great team, and they got to half time, and then they started the second half, and the coach said, "Okay, it's 0-0 again. Go out and play." Right? Same thing. Right? They were ahead, I don't know, 4 or 6 points, but the coach said.
It's like the boy that comes to the father, he says, "Look what I got." He says, "I got an A." He says, "What's the matter with an A plus?"
Okay, good. So that's the garments. Then chapter 5, if the garments are what the soul wears, chapter 5 is about the food of the soul, and it takes a close look at learning any kind of Torah text, and it talks about an incredible unity we have with Torah, where we're actually taking, again, this is what it's called Chochmah of Ein Sof, the inspirational intellect of the infinite, and it's coming down through our tradition. We think of it as just like texts in Reformed Judaism, but Kabbalah says, no, this is actually the insight of Ein Sof coming down right into the world. And we did a whole piece, okay, there's parts that we disagree with, I get that, and we're not gonna take that head on, but the parts we love and agree with, the 10 Commandments, and giving charity, and coming together on Shabbat, can we do those possibly with more joy and with more meaning through this pathway? By my saying, when I'm at Temple Israel singing Lecha Dodi, I'm actually encountering something called Chochmah of Ein Sof, the intellect of the infinite. And as such, I'm experiencing a unity that's only possible through that kind of activity. Because on the one hand, when I'm learning a Torah text, my mind surrounds it and encompasses it. At the same time, it encompasses my mind. Right? When you're learning something new, I'm trying to get into Talmud, and it's so complicated. And I'm grasping it, and I've got little pieces and ideas in place, but at the same time, there's this whole sea of Talmud that's around my mind. And so I'm surrounding it as it's surrounding me, and it's this double unity where we encompass it and it encompasses us. And the Alter Rebbe says there's no such unity that exists in the world between two such disparate beings. That intellect of the Ein Sof, true absolute infinity, can come and experience that unity with a limited being like me, who is basically non-existent compared to the infinite. And yet, here in a body, unlike when I'm a soul outside of a body, I can pick up a Torah text of Temple Israel and learn it, and I can experience direct connection and unity with Ein Sof. This is something you actually can't do when you're no longer a soul in a body. The only opportunity is here now, right? And yet, our body is so coarse that we can't see. If we could see, then we'd be back to a soul level, and then we couldn't do it anymore, right? Because a soul that tried to have that kind of unity with Ein Sof, as we said, would just be gone. It would be absorbed into the Ein Sof. I'm right now wearing like a big welder's mask, and I'm able to deal with this bright, bright light and barely registers, right? So the body functions something like a shield and a welder's mask, where now the soul can have direct connection with Ein Sof, which once it's back out of a body, now it's stuck at its level. It can't take 1 inch closer to the Ein Sof in that sense without just being dissolved. And that gets us to the end of the exploration of the divine soul. So divine soul, that is the second soul that comes in. It's the other-centered soul. It has 10 attributes that devolve or develop from the 10 sefirot of the cosmos and are mirroring them. There's 3 intellectual and 7 emotional, and the intellectual are the parents of the emotional. Then it has 3 garments, thought, speech, and action, that focus on, obviously, other-centered activity, helping people, learning Torah, doing mitzvahs. And there's also another piece about the organs, the divine soul, being the mitzvahs. It's a beautiful thing. Well, let's skip that for today. And then 6, 7, and 8, now we're describing the animal soul, the first soul. And one of the general rules of mysticism is that everything is a mirror of everything else. Everything is a miniature of everything else. Everything is inter-included in everything else. So when I look at myself, that is actually my best model for understanding the whole cosmos, and even beyond the cosmos, spiritual worlds and the Ein Sof. So I am, through my flesh, I'm able to look at God. That's the quote that we rely on. So everything in us is actually an exact parallel and structure of the models that are happening in the cosmos around me. Similarly, the animal soul and the divine soul are models of each other. So the animal soul, like the divine soul, has 10 attributes, but they're 10 attributes that think about number 1. Right? So whereas the divine soul, Chokhmah, would say, oh, let me go help someone today. The animal soul will say, Chokhmah, what can I get out of people today? Right? And then the animal soul will analyze that and think about it. The animal soul will then have feelings, where the divine soul would say, I love helping other people. The animal soul will say, I love getting stuff from other people. Right? So they're both they have their own way of using each of these either intellectual or emotional attributes. They both are a full personality. And of course, the animal soul has 3 garments: thought, speech, and action. And so if the animal soul gets the driver's wheel, now I'm thinking about how to take care of number 1, I'm talking about it, and I'm acting on that. And as we said, it may be very subtle. Sometimes a person spends a lot of time and does a lot of good, but underneath it, the drive is, why am I giving $1,000 to this charity? Because I want them to put my name on the paper, right? Not that there's anything wrong with a name on a paper, but if that's why I'm doing it, now really it's nefesh b'amid again. Okay, helping people, doing productive stuff, but in terms of my own development as a spiritual being, I want to be conscious. There's an even higher way that I could do it. I could do it completely altruistically. And then when I do that, now that's the divine soul has taken over, the divine soul is expressing. So part of what we're doing now is trying to track. A very wise teacher, Yitzhak Ginsburg, said, one of the keys of organizing your mind is knowing what categories to have to begin with. Right? What categories should I have in my mind? What are important categories? So this is a new category that we're trying to become sensitive to. When is the animal soul expressing? When is the divine soul expressing?
Does the Jewish people recognize the devil any place along the way? The devil made me do it.
And at the end of chapter 9, we're actually going to get right at that topic, so let's wait till then. So we have something that they mistook for what they call the devil, but it's not at all what they think it is. Right? It's actually its training partner is all it is.
It's actually what?
A training partner. Like when I'm in the gym, I'm a sparring partner. I'm preparing for a fight, and my coach brings in a sparring partner, and you walk in, you're like, this guy's beating up on him. He's he's hitting him and he's tripping him and he's catching him at every turn. He must be his enemy, right? But if you take a higher look, you realize it's my sparring partner. This is my best friend to prepare me for my challenge. Right? So we see it more like that.
So is it all black and white so much? Like, let's say, okay, in giving charity, if a part of me makes me feel good, I'm not going to do things that make me feel bad.
Yeah.
But if it makes me feel good to give, see my name in lights on a doorway,
Yeah.
if that enables me to get me closer to also feeling good about helping others, I mean, it seems to me it's more intermingled.
Yes. The question is it so black and white?
Separate.
Just because somebody's getting their name on something and it makes them feel good, does that mean now, it was an overall negative?
It might be a pathway
Yeah,
to
of course.
help me to
Yeah.
a different way of seeing it.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and absolutely, it depends, right? So for one person who never gave a penny in their life to charity, who was completely miserly in their personality and their upbringing, and for whom that's a huge challenge, then I might say, you know what, we're going to put your name on the cantor's doorway. Give me, $100, and it's going to be really hard for them to do, but they're going to do it, and for them that's a huge step and major growth. And the fact that I had to schlep them to do it, the fact that we put their name on something, wonderful. From their perspective, this is a huge leap and will lead to many great things, God willing. Another person for whom charity is a way of life, and that's a major, major skill of theirs, and they're used to giving all the time in big or small ways, it makes no difference. For them, they're giving all the time. Now for them, I might say, you know what? There's a better way to do it, right? You've kind of plateaued. You've gotten used to giving charity all the time, and now you're no longer pushing yourself. And as Jews, we want to always be progressing, right? So for them, I might say, you know what? Think about giving anonymously, right? Maimonides says it's a higher form of giving. Now you want to take another step up the ladder, right? So there's degrees, obviously, and good is good, right? From the perspective of the recipient, it's still tzedakah. From the perspective of the big scorecard, it's still a mitzvah. But from the perspective of the camera that sees my spiritual state, how am I moving upwards, how am I maturing, now it may actually be a plateau. So it depends.
Well, it can also be a slippery slope in the other direction.
Yes. Okay, let's not get too, this is a long conversation. So chapter 6, we've looked at the animal soul. It has, again, 10 sfirot. It has 3 garments. And it comes not from, and now in 7 and 8, we start to define the structure of the wider world around us. It also has an element of holiness. And holiness we describe as being connected to and nullified to the Ein Sof. It's as simple as that, right? So the Torahs in our sanctuary, we say those are Chochmah Ein Sof. They're now holy, they're connected to the Ein Sof, and we just all know inside, they have another level of them, right? The Ein Sof is they're sort of nullified, right? The same way when I'm writing, I don't have to explain to my hand the concept so the hand can understand it, then write it. I don't need to teach my hand what I'm thinking. My hand is nullified to my will and my mind. I just think thoughts and my hand has learned to write them and is nullified. So the Torah scroll is nullified to the Ein Sof in a similar way. The Ein Sof is just, it's all part of it. So there's holiness in the world, and that includes a small piece of the world, like the Kotel in Jerusalem, and it can be places, it can be times, it can be objects. And then there is the other side, which is called the Sitra Achra. That's a term we'll see a lot. Sitra Achra means other side. And from the point of view of Ein Sof, the Sitra Achra is just anything that is not nullified to holiness. It can be very, very, very subtle, or it can be very, very coarse in the way that it's separated. But anything that thinks that it exists, anything whose center is me, I'm here, that's now Sitra Achra. So I may be a mass murderer, God forbid, and be out for my, I just want to get pleasure out of the world and destroy people, and I'm part of the Sitra Achra. Or I may just be living a normal, productive life and just think, me, I'm Michael. Nothing's creating me right now. I'm just who I am. I've still taken a step away from the Ein Sof. I haven't recognized, or I'm not recognizing, that there's only one being here. That the Ein Sof is infinite, and that means there isn't anything else in reality. We feel like we're here for various reasons, but when we nullify ourselves to the Ein Sof and we do something because it's the right thing to do, because the Ein Sof has asked us to do it, we can now just very normally also nullify ourselves and be doing something for an other-centered reason. And same thing with the whole world. Anything that believes it has existence, that's Sitra Achra. But within the Sitra Achra, there's now two categories called the Klipa, and that means shell. There's Klipa Noga, and that's sort of a neutral Klipa, that's most stuff. And then there's three really, really coarse Klipot that, like for instance, the famous bacon cheeseburger on Yom Kippur, right? So it's sitting there on a plate. That for me is Klipa Noga. There's nothing I can do to elevate it. I'm supposed to just pass it by. Right? So within the Sitra Achra, there's two categories. There's three coarse Klipot that we can't really uproot, and there's Klipa Noga that we actually can elevate. And living life is a process of finding those parts of the world that are mine to elevate, interacting them through the garments of my divine soul, thus elevating them so the sparks of godliness within them actually return to their source. That's tikkun olam from a mystical perspective. That's the original definition of tikkun olam. And that's why Jewish mysticism is hidden in plain sight. You might be sitting at a meal next to an old woman who's drinking some wine with a blessing and having some challah and enjoying time with grandkids. And in fact, she's operating at the very highest levels. And what's really happening is the food and the words and the activity, all that share of reality is being transformed back into godly light and is being unified back with its source. And all she's doing is sitting having a meal with her grandkids.
I didn't know God was in this place.
Exactly, yeah, from this week.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
And the stone that he put under his head,
Uh-huh.
and then make the matzah out of it.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
I got the truth.
So Jewish mysticism is a little different from Eastern mysticism if you've been to yoga classes or learned Buddhism, in that in other traditions one might spend weeks or months or years meditating in seclusion and develop overt spiritual powers that you can create things and you can levitate, and we've seen this, some have experienced it, but Jewish mysticism believes God is not found any more in the spiritual than in the physical. God's hidden equally from both. I can have more and more spiritually elevated experiences. I'm not any closer to God. However, when in the physical I take my spiritual knowledge and I integrate that and I behave in a productive way, now I take the physical and I turn it back into spiritual. And that is actually the highest way of encountering the Ein Sof. So we keep our mystical pathway. It's more of a shape like this, and you'll see the most mystical people just doing very ordinary things, and sometimes really miraculous results will happen without any overt spiritual sense of elevation that's apparent, like it is in the East. So that's kind of an overview of what we've done in the structure of the soul. So there's many more details that I passed over that are certainly worth looking through, but I wanted to give anyone new a sense of where we're at. Any more questions about? Yeah? Okay, it's a lot. Feel free to call me up, email me, stay after class, we can talk if there's any questions as we go along. Yes?
You've used the word productive several times. How would God think that I'm productive? What would I have to do to be productive in his eyes or her eyes?
Oh, we have many, like we said, we have 613 organs, right? And any one of those, whichever one is presenting right now, is a productive thing. So certainly learning Tanya is productive. The question was, how do you define productive? So learning Torah is always a productive thing, as long as I'm not doing it because I want to be seen as smart, I want to make money, I want to be famous. If I'm doing it really earnestly to connect with God, that's productive. Any of the mitzvahs that you do around Temple Israel, celebrating a holiday, as we keep talking about giving tzedakah, dwelling in a sukkah, Hanukkah's coming up, lighting Hanukkah candles with your grandkids or your kids, you pick it, right? I mean, Judaism is full, and Temple Israel is full of ways to connect through these channels. So then chapter 9, we start to look at now what we do with this information, right? And we are on page 142, but we looked at now how these two souls interact, and they don't just kind of sit there in my psyche happy to do their thing and let the other one alone. They, in fact, are in a pitched battle all the time. They're going at each other all the time. And we learned that, in fact, they each have their own headquarters in this battle. And the animal soul is headquartered in my heart. Specifically, and he says the left side of the heart, meaning the physical side of the heart, the part of the heart that pumps the blood to the body and connects to the body and flows through the blood more, that it's connected to my physical energy. And the divine soul is headquartered in the brain, and from there flows down to the right side of the heart, or the side of the heart that connects to my higher being. And it's in the heart that they actually encounter each other, and each one wants to control everything. Each one wants to express itself through all of the sphirot, and then express in the world through all three garments, and wants the other one to have no say in the matter, right? The reason is because they really have very diametrically opposite views of reality. The animal soul is out to protect me, and it thinks the divine soul wants to rise up back to its source and be annihilated, as it were. It wants to commit suicide. And the animal soul says that divine soul is crazy. You can't give it the keys to the car for a minute. And the divine soul looks at the animal soul and says, all it wants to do is think about itself. Every time it does that, it cuts me off from the Ein Sof, and now I'm gone. Like now it wants to kill us. It wants to cut us from our source of life. It's like it thinks it's deep diving, and it has this tube of air connecting it, and the animal soul wants to cut that tube and kill us, right? And you can't give that animal soul the keys to the car ever, because it'll drive off a cliff. It wants to disconnect us from the Ein Sof. So they each think the other one wants to commit suicide, and they each think the other one is crazy, and they don't want the other one to have one garment to express, one attribute to flow through. They want total domination. So it's described as two rulers fighting over a city. And I'm the city, my psyche, my intellect, my emotions, my body, my voice, my thought, my actions. And each of these rulers wants to control the city entirely, and they're having a battle. Right, one issue with another nation, another person. Good. So we're on page 142. The entire body should be permeated with them alone, whether the divine or the animal soul. No alien thought would even pass through the organs, God forbid. And now we're going to go through the whole scope of what the divine soul would like to do. Now we get instructions for this later in the 52 chapters, but this is something that is beyond the ability of most people. But he's going to show us what the divine soul's wishes were. If the divine soul were on a psychiatrist's couch, tell me what you want from life, divine soul. And I was like, I want to take over all the attributes I want to express every time I want. In fact, I don't want to leave the animal soul alone. I want to transform the animal soul too. I want it to want what I want. So we're talking about, if we were to do this, we'd all be tzaddikim, right? Now we're looking at the point of view of the divine soul, what it would like to do. It's possible, but it's really only a few in a generation that can actually do what we're describing here, as we're looking through intellect, emotions, and expression of what the divine soul would like. Tayinu tilat mochin shebarosh yu memulaim mechochma bin hadat shebanefesh elokit. So that is to say, I'll find it for you. Right here. Everybody got it? It's at the bottom of the back of the second page. That is to say.
That is to say specifically the three brains, the three sections of the brain, which correspond to the three intellectual faculties. That would be permeated with the Chabad of the divine soul.
All right, so that is to say, what the divine soul would like to do is that first we start with intellect. So for those of us who have learned, or if you can come to our evening class, we'll do more detail. Chochma bin dat, inspiration, analysis, and then direct connection to, emotionally. That would all be directed towards other-centered, Jewish traditions, Torah, mitzvahs, ways of improving the world, ways of improving myself. That's all that the divine soul would ever have us ever focus on in terms of our intellect, right? So the same way, if I walk by a lamppost, I don't think, wow, I'd like to eat that lamppost, right? It doesn't. I don't have a craving for it, right? So the same thing. I'd walk by any food that I'm not supposed to eat, be it non-kosher, bad for me, somebody else's, whatever it is, and I wouldn't walk by it and say, "Oh, I'd really like to have that glass of whatever or that sandwich or whatever." I wouldn't even think about it. It's all just a lamppost to me. I don't think about eating a lamppost, right? So put any counterproductive idea in there. The divine soul would say that just wouldn't even occur to you. And that's the state of a tzaddik. For a tzaddik doesn't need to have any discretion, right? One of the teachers, Shais Taub, often says, if you want to know if you're a tzaddik, then for 24 hours, just follow every impulse that occurs to you, 100%. If anything pops into your mind, go ahead and do it. And if after 24 hours you're not dead or in jail, you're a tzaddik, right? So most of us need to have a lot of discretion. The divine soul says, none of that. Intellect would never even focus. It would never occur to you to say that thing or do that thing, right? It'd be like walking by a garbage can. I don't think about opening it up and eating it, right? It just wouldn't occur to me. And that's in every category. That's in interpersonal relationships. That's in choices we make morally. That's in what we eat and what we don't eat, what we think and what we don't think, everything.
Why is the B and D capitalized in Chabad?
Because they're showing us why are the B and D in Chabad capitalized at the bottom of 142. Because Chabad is not just the name of a particular sort of philosophical movement in Judaism. It's actually what the Alter Rebbe coined as the type of mysticism focused on intellect, Chokhmah, Bina, and Da'at. So the B is big to show you that it's for Bina. The D is big to show you it's for Da'at. It's an what's the word? Scuba? Acronym. It's an acronym. Shehi Chokhmat Hashem Uvinato.
Namely, in discerning God and understanding Him, applying the faculties of Chokhmah and Bina to the understanding of godliness.
Right. So I walk around thinking, boy, I'd like to have a nice new car because it would really feel good to have that new car, and people would think I'm so cool, and I drive around in it. And I might think about that for an hour, right? Okay, I'm not hurting anybody, but that's nefesh ba'amit thinking. And from my spiritual inner lens, I'm strengthening nefesh ba'amit. I'm strengthening my self-centered tendencies. And in fact is, the more I strengthen that, now when somebody honks at me in traffic, how dare you? This car is me. Don't honk at me, right? And I start yelling at them. It does come out. The more I let that part of me strengthen, the more I think the car is me, I'm the car makes me feel good. Now someone honks at my car, and what do? Right? Whereas if I walked around all day thinking, okay, I need to get somewhere, I'll get whatever car is appropriate. Maybe when someone honks at me, I'll say, oh, I wonder why they're honking. Maybe I can somehow help them, right? I won't yell back at them. But that's what the divine soul wants, right? I would only think about other-centered things, or godly things. להתבונן בגדולתו אשר עד אין קץ עד אין חקר ואין סוף.
But pondering his unfathomable and infinite greatness with these two faculties.
Right, and even beyond thinking appropriately, now we're talking about the systems of meditation that are very, very ancient in Judaism, and there are meditation texts in every generation. And here he's talking about actual meditation on concepts, mystical concepts of the Ein Sof. Right? So when I think about, boy, I'd like that car, that's nefesh b'amit thinking. When I think, before my service at Temple Israel, I'm going to sit for 5 minutes, and I'm just going to quietly direct my mind towards the infinite, the nature of the infinite. You can pick any mystical concept from our whole tradition, but I might sit and perhaps look at how the whole world is constantly being created by the infinite, according to mysticism. So there's like a movie, and there's a light from this infinite source, infinite light that's projecting down, down, down until it hits a screen. That screen is time, space, and consciousness. And like a movie projector, it's happening all the time. It's always projecting. And everything happening here, actual physical creation, is just being projected onto time, space, and consciousness. And how amazing that everything happening is coming from this one infinite being. And if I just use some simple meditations, Label has a system to clear one's mind and open up a wisdom gateway, as he calls it, and then direct my intellect to that. That is deeply, deeply strengthening my divine soul and also elevating every part of me. So that's the hallmark of Jewish meditation, is we clear the mind, much like we do in the East in meditation, and create a neutral playing field. And then we introduce a mystical concept and focusing on it and allowing the details to emerge and fill the mind entirely. So we don't empty the mind, we fill it completely so nothing else is in it. And through that, we elevate and elevate. So Divine Soul would also like to do that, right? No just kind of showing up at the holidays and rushing through the parking and getting your seat and then, here we go, right? We really would find time to sit and prepare ourselves for services to create a sense of elevation in there. Beholid mehen al yedei hadat hayira b'mocho ufachad Hashem bilibo.
Through applying to this meditation, the faculty of Dhat, knowledge, as well, through immersing oneself in the subject of God's greatness with the depth typical of Dhat, so that one not only understands this greatness, but actually feels it. They, for example, his aforementioned faculties of
Chokhmah.
Chachma and Bina, engaged in pondering God's greatness, will give birth to an awe of God in his mind and dread of God in his heart.
Okay, so we'll have to stop here. Let me just sum this one up. So now we're going to move to the emotions. But in the intellect, there's inspiration and analysis, Chokhmah and Bina. There's also a third aspect, Dhat. Dhat means knowledge in the same way that Adam and Eve knew each other, right? It's not a whole collection of facts knowing something. Knowing means being directly connected to it, right? That's why the sexual union is described in the Torah as Dhat, as knowledge, because that's how we actually connect to another person. Not that I know now, their height and their weight and how they sound, etc., but that actually now I'm connected to them. So I will have feelings about them, right? Someone talks about some doctor in the world who's so brilliant, and I'm like, great. Someone talks about my wife and how brilliant she is, right? Now you're just, I feel I'm on a cloud, right? So because I'm connected to her. So the same information, neutral about someone else, will not cause feelings in my consciousness, but that information about my wife, who I am connected to, causes feelings in my consciousness. We want to have that fire, that Dhat. Nefesh Elokit wants that Dhat to also focus on either productive thoughts and actions, or in this case, focusing on the Ein Sof, meditating on the Ein Sof creating the world, or whatever mystical concept you want. And then I want to actually feel something about it. Dhat is what causes me to take this information and cause it to allow love to flare up, or what we call awe to flare up. And that is actually the pathway of Jewish meditation, is not erasing the world through emptying the mind and then transcending everything, but rather moving into the spiritual to then bring that down and integrate it into my emotions, so that then I feel love when it's appropriate and fear when it's appropriate, which we'll talk about next week. Thank you. Any questions? Feel free to hang out.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You'll learn, you'll leave you with more questions.
I do meditation now,
Very nice.
but I do guided meditation.
Okay.
Does he have a guided meditation?
Absolutely. It's a 7